Hey everybody, welcome back to Choosers of the Slain. This is episode 4. Sorry for the delay. It has been quite the month, but we are back. We are in action, and we are talking hobby today.
Hobby.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
Yeah, it is. It is. So obviously the big dump was contrast.
Contrast paint is amazing.
Yep. So that will be the majority.
That conclude our review of contrast paint.
I mean, I thought we could maybe talk about it a little more.
Well, I suppose we could elaborate.
I think we can both agree that Black Templar is Games Workshop's gift to gamers.
Oh my God, it looks so good.
Yeah.
I do have, like, from my experimenting with it, I do have some downsides with it, but
Sure.
it is a solid color.
Yeah. And the only paint that I've really done much experimenting with out of contrast is, what is that? Apothecary white. Mm-hmm. But I like the effect that it gives. I like that it's kind of a cooler white. And the thing I've noticed with it, and I've seen and talked to some people that have had issues, and I think the real trick when it comes to especially the lighter colors is you want to make sure that you're pulling any excess away from the flat spaces on the model, because if you don't, you will get that pooling.
Oh, absolutely. The lighter the color you're working with, the more the pooling just stands out, and it kind of feels like you just are working with a wash.
Yeah, exactly.
The darker, more vivid colors certainly just lay down like liquid gold.
Yeah.
But I've seen a similar thing. Actually, one of the things I was going to bring up is Space Wolf's Gray.
Okay.
If you're not careful, I've seen somebody start to do a intercessor unit with Space Wolf's Gray over a satin white primer, so not using one of the official GW undercoats, but it definitely had a pretty heavy coffee staining effect.
Okay.
And I think some of that was user error, but I also wondered how much of it was just going over white instead of going over the gray.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something I've seen with the lighter colors.
Yeah, so that's one thing I will say is I did my Apothecary white over the Games Workshop. What is that? Corax white, the spray. And yeah, I started to get some of that staining. Yeah. I wonder how much of that is primer choice. Yeah. I know we've talked back and forth about, is it a satin finish? Is it what makes that primer special? I would be very tempted to try it over a gloss primer.
I've thought about doing that myself with I have a particular gold primer that's not the like GW Retributor Armor Spray or anything like that. That in the past, while I'm really happy with the gold undercoat that it creates, it is so glossy and such a smooth enamel coat, because the rattle cans are usually enamel unless you specifically buy otherwise, right. That I often have trouble getting paint to stick to it. Yeah. And so I'm kind of tempted to maybe do like a test Blood Angel or something by priming it with that gold and then running Blood Angel's red over it, and just seeing how it looks over that gold. And that's like a high gloss, very, very, very slick undercoat. Yeah. And I'm kind of curious the same thing. My understanding, based on GW's community page ramblings, is that the Wraithbone and Grey Seer are satin. Yeah. However, I have not used the rattle cans of those, because when they mentioned that they were satin, I was like, oh, well, the primer brand that I use happens to be Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch. Yeah. And I happen to have a very, very light beige and a very, very light cool gray already in satin that I had bought years ago for I think it was doing a table, like actually painting like the plywood for a table. Oh, sure. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll just finish those cans up. Yeah. And that's what I've been painting contrast over, and it has worked like a charm. So I'm thinking that it's probably that, but I can't corroborate until I actually spray. Yeah. From the officials. Yeah,
I've got a couple primers that I'd like to try it out with, just to see what kind of effects come down.
I actually want to try it over Stynal Res. I want to prime something with my airbrush with Stynal Res, and drop contrast over to see what happens.
Yep, I've got a bottle of white sitting upstairs that I just want to break out one of these days. I just hate running primer through the airbrush, but
Stynylrez is pretty solid choice though.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah,
I haven't used it yet. I bought it a while ago.
I've used it for a lot of like my single characters, stuff like Ixion Hail or Severina Rain, like the kind of one-off special models. I don't prime with a rattle can because I don't want to fight with gumming up detail.
Yeah, I think it's kind of to digress a little bit, but I think that'll be a thing that I do more of in the future is prime my characters and the models that I really care about. They're not the 12-point dude that's going to get pulled off the table in handfuls. It's the 300-point character that, you want to look really good.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to start to shy away from using rattle cans on those and start going to airbrush primer.
I can definitely get behind that. Something, and this is the hobby episode. We haven't really laid out a specific format yet, but this may feel like a slight tangent. Something that I guess I have kind of strong opinions about in the hobby area is folks who are just like, oh, primer should never be showing on the finished model. And I disagree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's much like dry brushing. That's a thing that gets dismissed as a beginner's move.
Sure.
And I think if you're choosing the right primer and you're using the right techniques, if the end result model looks good, that's what matters.
Yeah.
Any way you can get to a beautiful model, like don't let people judge how you get there. And that's one of the reasons why I choose to use the Painter's Touch line from Rust-Oleum, not to like overly plug their product, but you have just about as many colors as the Army Painter line, but you get the cans for like $6, and maybe one out every 3 or 4 gums up or has like that doesn't spray the way you want it to because it's a cheap rattle can. But if you practice, if you spray off on a piece of wood or a piece of cardboard before you hit the model, like you should, even when you're using $20 primer, you'll catch that before it wrecks your miniatures.
Yeah.
And all you got to do is just, get a toothbrush out, clean the spray head, or just switch it with another spray head. So I mean, there's things that you can do to overcome those kind of quote unquote cheap tool problems. And with that level of color, they have matte finishes and they have satin and they have glossy finishes. Can't tell you how much time I've saved over the years, like priming bloodletters in a glossy candy apple and then washing them with Agrax Earthshade and then dry brushing corn red over it.
Right.
And done. You get a nice, 3-color, transition between them. Just go back and hit the details of the brush paint, and you can see some of the primer through, but it's okay because it was by design.
Right.
You're doing pink and blue horrors. Cool. Buy like a light blue primer and a pink primer, and prime them, and then just wash them.
I don't want to talk about pink primer.
Yeah, the pink primer. So pink primer often, in my experience, has the same problem that many white primers do, which is magically they're garbage.
Right. Yeah.
For whatever reason, no matter how high quality of a white primer you buy, it finds a way to fail you. Whether it's the can goes bad or whether it won't stick, doesn't give you a good solid coat, whatever it is. For whatever, I don't know, but white primer is always a nightmare. Yeah. And I found that both Krylons, both Rust-Oleums, the off-branded, whatever, non-Army Painter, non-GW pinks suffer from the same problem that whites do.
Yeah. I've had some rough experiences with the Rust-Oleum pink, but
I recall stripping them for you.
Yeah. And there's still, like, those models are done being painted now and they still have texture on them. You couldn't get it off.
Yeah.
And no matter how much I scrubbed at them, it stuck. But all that kind of feeds into this contrast idea.
Yes.
In that, like you said, primer showing on a model it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's certainly not something to be looked down upon, especially if the person looking down upon it has gray plastic.
Oh, absolutely.
and contrast is right along that line. Like, is it the Sistine Chapel level work, or does it provide the tool for Sistine level chapel work? Probably not.
In my experience, no.
But It's better than gray plastic.
Well, and I'd go a step further than that. I think it actually is good.
Yeah.
It's in the grand scheme of marketing, there's always your good, better, best.
Yep.
It's how everybody markets everything. Well, this is your solid option. It's good, but this one's better. I think it sells contrast short to say that it is just like a beginner's tool.
Yeah, I agree.
Does it produce Golden Demon winning level quality? Absolutely not. But what it does produce is above average. Somebody who uses it correctly and like chases their pooling and uses it the way it's supposed to be used. What you get is better than just good. It's pretty nice looking.
Yeah. Especially at a tabletop level.
Oh, absolutely.
3, 4, 5 feet away.
Less than tabletop time investment for better than tabletop look.
Yeah.
And that's the magic of contrast.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that, I think that's what Games Workshop was going for. And obviously it has its pros and cons, but all in all, I really feel like they hit it out of the park with this one.
I would agree.
And their marketing for it was
amazing.
On.
Well, here it is. The product's only been out for 2 weeks, and there's already black, white, and the 2 brush primers are back ordered. They're blowing through it.
Yeah. How many pots of Black Templar have you sold through already?
12 or 18.
Yeah. And it's not a big store.
No, we're in a small town. Like our it's 18. I did the initial one, then a reorder, and then I went to reorder it. I sold basically people like pre-ordered replacements, and then it was on back order. So I owe 5 jars, so it's a 17 technically. But
make mine 18.
Okay.
I'd like a jar too.
Yeah, no, it's fair. But yeah, it is. Black Templar is just adds the bee's knees, man.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
My little niggling complaint with it is if it doesn't achieve exactly how dark you want, going over it with a lighter gray to darken it a little bit, or thinning it is the way to go. Because what I've found is to just do a second coat takes you from this amazing sweet look to as flat and dark as a rattle can black.
Yeah.
It does not. It layering it over itself is unforgiving. That's my only complaint about Black Templar.
I run into that with the Vallejo transparent paints.
Mm-hmm.
Red in particular and blue as well. 1 coat might not be enough. 2 coats, you're probably in your sweet spot. Once you go to 3 or more, you might as well just be painting with red paint.
Yeah. And that's my experience with Black Templar. Is if you don't think 1 coat is dark enough, thin it with the contrast medium.
Yep.
Or use basilicanum gray, the next step up maybe.
Oh, sure.
That's going to add a slightly brownish tone to it because it is a less black.
Right.
I don't maybe even going over it with a medium gray like Space Wolves or something like that.
Sure.
But something to just add a little bit more pigment to it, or maybe even washing it with Nuln Oil. I don't know. But I just find that I put a second coat of Black Templar on a couple custodians, and they went from looking amazing but maybe not dark enough to looking like I had just rattle canned them black.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed in that.
So kind of along that note, or along that line, between us at least, it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of the airbrush workup.
Mm-hmm.
Of the strong gradient from very bright to very dark, almost a cartoony look at times. I really do want to try something like Black Templar over a black to white zenithly highlighted airbrush workup, because I get the feeling you're going to get a very stark contrast where those highlights, where it's pulled away from the fine details and the raised edges and everything, are going to be really crisp, and the shades are almost going to fade away into nothing.
that would be a situation where I would be tempted to utilize gloss.
Yeah.
Because if you're, depending on how heavy-handed the white highlight is in your pre-shade, the way, because contrast is designed like a shade wash to pool in the recesses, and those recesses are already going to be black. If the Black Templar covers too much of the white, I would be a little concerned that it's going to like be really, really dark.
Yeah.
So unless you're aggressive with your white highlight, I would almost airbrush a gloss coat on, like prime it black and then zenithal highlight it white, and then like just airbrush a Minotaur or Vallejo or whatever, or even if you want to use the art coat from GW,
gloss varnish.
Whatever it is your particular poison is of choice, and get a gloss coat on it before doing the Black Templar. That would be my instinct on that one.
Boy, I would worry though that with it being gloss, it would make it run further into the recesses.
Well, I would be trying to preserve as much white as possible, I guess, is what I'm saying, is because I'd be a little worried that, like, if you weren't aggressive enough with your white highlight,
it would just
you would lose most of the white.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I got you.
I could be explaining it poorly, but yeah, that would be either you would want like a 70-30 ratio of, like, before you put the Black Templar on, when you're looking at the model, you'd want it to be like 70 white, 30 black. Like, so that the very deep shadows are black, but the rest of it is white.
Yep.
Or you would want 50-50 and then a gloss coat. But that is entirely instinct, because I have been using Black Templar over a Rust-Oleum equivalent to Wraithbone.
Right.
Because I'm doing custodians with it, I decided to strip, because I wanted to experiment with contrast.
Yeah.
So I stripped my custodian army that I had been working on for the last, supposedly since January, but not as much as I'd like. And I switched back to my first initial love, which were the Shadow Keepers. And so because of all the golds and the reds that are on the Shadow Keepers, I wanted them to have a warm base. So instead of priming them in a gray and then washing the Black Templar and then putting bone on all of the details that would become red and gold, I just was, you know what, I'm just going to put the Black Templar over the warm, and then hopefully that'll create some like visual consistency in the highlights, and I've been very happy with it thus far.
Yeah, what I've seen of it looks really good.
My favorite part though, because as an airbrush artist as well as a traditional brush painter, how quickly you can lay down a base coat with an airbrush is just amazing.
Yep.
But there is just, I don't know, it's just an amazing thing to watch how good of a result you get laying your base coats down with contrast.
Yeah.
I took a Custodes character who's fairly detailed. I mean, it's like a 20-piece model for a guy on a 40 mil base. Right. Fairly detailed guys. And I was able to fully base coat the model, ready to be clear coated and switch to detail painting in 12 minutes and 11 seconds.
Wow.
Because I was timing myself. Wow. But just the fact that, and like his cloak already had, like before going back and touching anything with details, the cloak already had beautiful just transitions between, it was just a solid looking model. I mean, obviously not finished, but like a solid looking model in less than 15 minutes.
Right. Well, and compared to how long it would take to base coat that with traditional paint.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're going over a white, good luck with black.
Yeah.
You've got 4 or 5 coats to make that look really smooth.
Well, and on top of that, the transitions and highlights that you get out of that one coat of contrast is that takes out 3 layers of paint right there.
Yep.
So to sound, at the risk of sounding like we are like praying at the altar of contrast, both of us have been pretty pleased with that as a product.
Yeah.
Some colors are better than others.
Yeah.
Hands down. Apothecary white, the Iandon yellow, the both reds, Blood Angels red, and oh my God, Flesh Terrors red is so gorgeous.
It is.
Leviathan blue is solid. The leathers, like, well, all the browns really.
Yeah.
Snakebite leather, Skeleton Horde, what is it? Gore Grunta and Wildwood.
Wildwood looks really good.
Yeah, they're just all the browns are solid. Yeah, they really hit it out of the park with this product line.
Yeah,
I can't speak more highly of it. Now, I like that a coat of contrast, according to GW, is 1/10 the thickness of the coat of base paint. Like if you just paint one layer of base paint on, or you do contrast, it's 1/10 of the thickness. I am wondering how fragile it might be over time.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to clear coat, which realistically, if you're playing with your miniatures, you should be doing anyway.
Yeah.
But Games Workshop really pushed the clear coating angle with Storm Shield and the repackaged Ard coat.
Yes. Well, they even did a video on it.
Yeah, and I think that even if they didn't explicitly say it, I think that points pretty clearly to the contrast is really thin and it's going to tear if you don't properly protect it.
Well, and that's another thing too. Speaking of tearing, is part of the science of paint for those of you out there who are newer to it and I know you've experienced this if you've painted miniatures, but you might not have known why. The way paint dries on a model is it dries from the outside in. And that's why, like, when you're doing washing on models, you can get that, like, weird skin if you come back to the model too early or whatever. It's because the outer layer is dried. And Nate knows this, so he's nodding at me. But I just want to put it out there.
Yeah.
And so you can actually, if you paint over something too quickly, you can tear the skin on the surface and expose wet paint under. The risk of that with contrast is because the pigmentation is so heavy on them. I mean, some of them GW has said are straight up just dyes mixed into the contrast medium.
Yeah.
And so with that heavy of pigmentation, if you don't give it its due time to dry, there's a good chance that you could very, very easily tear that skin on the top and then spread that very thick, very, very colorful contrast that's still wet under the skin around on the miniatures. That would be one thing I definitely would suggest to folks is really mind your dry times, unless you're intentionally blending, which is a separate beast. But just really mind your dry times with contrast because it's so colorful that if you do tear it and you move it, it is going to be hard to cover up where you make a hole in it. Like, 'cause if you expose the gray sear or the wraithbone under the red or whatever, the blue, it's going to be a very stark kind of like polka dot.
Yeah.
Unless you just redo the whole thing. Or also if your brush gets wet with the still fresh contrast under the surface, then it's going to mix with whatever color you're trying to do. So just be mindful of that, I would say.
Yeah, I know. You mentioned how long it took you to paint the one custode. I did a full unit of Necron Warriors, just their base, their base apothecary white, because I'm going for more of a porcelain look. I did a whole unit of 12 of those in I think half an hour, because there's not that much to them.
Yeah.
But I then let them dry overnight because it needs that time to cure. Contrast is one of those paints where it's like a wash in that washes always take longer to dry than you think they do.
Yeah.
And
when you think you're done, wait longer.
Yeah. And if you don't give them the time they need, you're going to ruin the effect.
Yeah.
Now add to the fact that what I was using was white, and white is particularly prone to that as well. Overnight just seemed like the safest option. And I would say contrast speeds up a lot of things, but it still requires patience. Yeah.
And it is, as we've said before, it's not a magic bullet. It's an amazing tool. And
exactly.
And so you need to treat it like a tool and respect its flaws, respect its strengths. It's not going to magically solve your problems, but the effects that it creates are pretty wondrous.
Yeah.
So kind of in selling it to customers on launch weekend, I was likening it to a hammer. It is a very simple, basic tool that most people can understand. It is way better than hammering in a nail with a rock.
Or a tape measure.
Yeah, but you take a hammer. Anybody can break something with a hammer or pound in a nail.
Yeah.
Maybe they might bend the nail, but they can at least pound in the nail, and it's much more useful to have a hammer than it is to have a rock or a frozen banana, right?
Yes.
But you take like a master carpenter and the tricks and the little things that they can do with a hammer just by knowing how wide the head of the hammer is. They can do like, kind of shortcut measurements and just, doesn't matter how simple the tool is. Once you master that tool, you can do just amazing things with it that are way more complicated than just hammering in a nail. Yeah. And I think that I think that's a good analogy for contrast, because it's a simple tool that anybody can understand. You pick up the hammer, you hit the thing with it. But when you really play with it and you really get down to it, it belongs in anybody's tool belt. It's not just for people trying to get rid of their gray plastic. I mean, I could foresee contrast replacing some people's weathering pigments. I could see contrast replacing a lot of the base coating work that like high-end painters do, where, you just get your model to a base coat with that, clear coat it, and then go to work on all the details and do all the wet blending and all the crazy stuff. And, at the end of the day, maybe only a little bit of the contrast is seen through all of the million other layers, but you know what? It saved you the 5 hours at the beginning, and that's still 5 hours you got back.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think it's great. Of all the things that GW has released over the years, this is actually, I would say, probably the product of theirs that I've been the most thoroughly pleased with.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I have my praises and my gripes for the rest of their paint line, but Contrast has so far pretty consistently been a good product from what I've seen. I'm looking forward to getting to play with it a little more, try it out on a few things. I want to put together a Lamenter's army. Been thinking about doing the Wraithbone with the was that Nazdrag yellow, the kind of brownish yellow, to give them a little more of a grungy look.
That's fair.
But I don't know. We'll see.
I've been contemplating Emperor Spears. I've been reading a lot of the stuff. I read in the White Dwarf. There's an excerpt from the novel.
Oh, nice.
And it's it is interesting to me, so I'm toying around with the idea of starting a small Emperor Spears army, and I'll probably do Contrast for that, just because there's some really, really sharp blues.
Yeah, the Contrast has some really good blues. Probably one of the stronger parts of the line, honestly.
Yeah, I would say so. The reds are absolutely amazing.
Yep.
Honestly, I think it nailed the primaries the best.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think it's really like black, white, blue, yellow, red. They're all solid.
Yeah.
The greens are pretty all right. Purples, the light purple is a little too light, and the dark purple is a little too dark for my taste.
I haven't seen those two.
But generally speaking, I think that the basic colors, black, white, red, yellow, blue, I think they're just amazing.
I mean, if you're going to get them right, those are the ones you want to get right.
That's fair. Did you have anything more you wanted to talk about Contrast, or we want to take a little break?
No, I think we can take a short break here and come back for what'll probably be our second half. So why don't we cut to some music, and we'll be back shortly.
Alrighty. All right, everybody, welcome back. Chooses the Slain, episode 4. Coming back from our break, we had just talked about contrast paints and how it's a tool in your tool belt. So we kind of wanted to use that to segue into a conversation about hobby tools.
Yeah, so we both have
strong opinions.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to put it. About what our favorite products are for assembling and cleaning and
absolutely
cutting models and everything. And it's always an exciting day when you get a good tip for some new tool to try out.
Yeah.
And when it pans out, it's fantastic. And when it doesn't, you're wondering why you wasted the money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I know plastic cement wise, we're both big fans of the Tamiya thin cement.
Yes, the extra thin cement that
extra
comes
thin,
in a little square jar with the green top.
Cap. Yeah.
That stuff, it's got a brush applicator. It is just solid. And it is a potent enough plastic cement that one of my favorite parts about it is, it's extra thin and you can dry fit the pieces and you can paint it right along the seam with the brush applicator and it runs right in the cracks and all those things. That's great.
Yeah.
What I love about it is that you can actually use it to smooth rough plastic because you can use that brush applicator to tease if you've got like a little rough edge or maybe some pitting or something. You can actually just paint slowly and carefully, and you can smooth plastic out because it'll melt right under the brush.
Yeah.
So it once again, just kind of different uses for what's a basic tool is just your glue. You can do all kinds of things with it. But yeah, I can't say enough about Tamiya extra thin plastic cement.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite tricks, I guess you would say, to use with it is to do what you mentioned, where you dry fit the pieces, and usually I'll put a little bit in between to get the start of the hold, and then dry fit it and run it around the seam. And if it's a visible seam, I'll wait for it to at least the surface of it to dry, and then run sandpaper along, and all that plastic dust gets down in there, and by the time it dries, you've got a smooth finish.
Yeah.
It's like the seam's not even there.
Yeah, it just melts that dust right into the
it's
right into the joint.
So much better than green stuff or milliput or anything. It's much less time consuming.
Absolutely.
And takes a lot less work. But kind of on the other end of assembling models, the first step, of course, is to clip them off the sprue.
Oh, yes.
And, a flush cutter is a flush cutter unless you have a god hand. I picked one up, saw some recommendations from the Gundam modeling community.
Well, they have much stiffer, I guess, or more hard plastics to cut through.
Yeah.
So, the tools that they use have to be top notch.
Yep. And so I saw that recommendation and I picked up a pair, not the highest end ones, but the mid tier. I don't even remember what the model number is. They have a red handle, and figured, okay, it's a little more expensive than the Citadel clippers, which were the ones I had been using,
and are my weapon of choice.
Right. And they're the ones that I preferred for years. But oh man, these god hand ones, it is like you are cutting through butter. It's smooth. You get a really good cut on it, and if you hold it flush enough, sometimes you don't even have to clean the spot. Like, it just cuts it so close. But I mean, I think the real trick there is that it's only got one cutting edge, so you're bracing against one side of it, and then the other side is razor sharp, but you've got the spring action, and you get the lever, the benefit of the lever, simple machine to do that. So I don't know. I will continue using them. I've run into a couple frustrations just in that because they're a little bit shorter. Sometimes it's tough to get them into, especially some of the older sprues. They'll get caught. But beyond that, I mean, I've been very pleased with them. I could probably rant more about them than I could about my weird gold-bladed X-Acto knife that I don't even remember. It's like zircon or something like that. But I could rant about that one too, because that's also amazing and much cheaper.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. So speaking of decent, not hyper expensive tools, something that I have been very pleased with is, for Christmas, I got a new hand drill.
Oh, yeah.
And this is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. I don't know if it's Werkzeug or Werkzeug.
Okay.
But it's Werkzeug.
Okay.
You can get them on Amazon. It's a little black hand drill. And I think they call it the micro mini twist drill. I'm not sure what the official Workzug name for it is. But if you get on Amazon and you search for Workzug hand drill, you'll find it. And it is nice, low profile, solid, well-made hand drill.
Okay.
But one of my favorite parts about it is in the bearings or other engineering tools that I'm not, or engineering words that I'm not necessarily up on, in the palm rest or the knuckle rest on the very back that you hold against your hand to provide the driving pressure.
Yeah.
It has like a little click in it when it twists. So, and that, what that prevents it from doing is that swivel joint doesn't misalign and then like grind against itself kind of.
Okay.
I wish I had more eloquent engineering terms with which to explain this, but like with a lot of hand drills I've used, you make your pilot hole, you fit it, the bit into the pilot hole, and you start turning, and you're using that backrest on the drill to provide the forward pressure.
Yep.
And the swivel joint there, over time as it wears out, it'll kind of shift so that it's not like matched up correctly. It's at a slight angle.
Yeah.
And so then as it turns through that angle, it's like grinding on itself, kind of like a bad wheel bearing in a car.
Sure.
And whatever it is about the construction of that Workzug one, that the fact that they put an extra little bearing or an extra piece in there, and as you twist it, it has a very light, non-obtrusive, like rattly click as it turns. But whatever that extra piece is holds that solid. And so it not only is the whole hand drill made well, but it just I use it a lot, and I have yet to have a situation where as I'm turning it, I felt it like fighting itself.
Yeah.
So it's just a really, really solid little tool. I got that for Christmas, and I just used the hell out of it.
Yeah. I'll have to check that out. Drilling out bolters and stuff is always such a chore for me. I've tried it with a Dremel, and you got to be careful because if you go too fast, you melt the plastic and all that. But I struggle with hand drills because a lot of the regular ones, like my hand cramps up after 4 or 5 bolters. But I'll have to try that one out.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy with it. I took my old hand drill and I just put a needle in it. And I guess more of a spike. It's not really a needle, but and I just use that to start pilot holes.
Yeah, makes
so
sense.
It's like my old hand drill is basically just a stabber now.
Yeah.
And then I actually do the drilling with that Workzug one.
I'll have to check that out.
So those are kind of some of our favorite tools there. And then of course brushes. We could
Oh gosh, I don't think we have
Talk
time to
forever
get
about
into brushes. I inventoried my brushes the other day because I had to clean a bunch of them because it had been a little while since I'd given them a good cleaning. And yeah, let's not talk about brushes. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So maybe at some point in time we'll do a brush episode.
We could do a full episode on brushes. Yeah. I don't think that would be an issue.
Without going into everything, because if we do have somebody who's new here listening to the podcast that is new to the hobby, if you had to say basic, like your starter brushes, what would you recommend? Would you recommend the GW ones?
Starter brushes. That's a tough one for me. The GW brushes are good. I don't have any issues with them. I strongly consider Winsor Newton Series 7s, especially because you can generally get them. They're relatively inexpensive depending on where you buy them. 12, 13, 14 bucks a brush. And a lot of the Games Workshop ones start to get up into that range, especially when you get into the nicer, like the Artificer brushes and everything. But actually, I think for just standard base coating, just getting started, getting paint on the model, there is a synthetic line from, I believe it's Princeton. Has a red handle, and I cannot think of what it's called offhand, but they have a synthetic line that's really nice. If I can, I'll find it and put a link in the description.
All right. So, I mean, I may be a little bit biased because I have a store that sells Games Workshop products.
Well,
But the basic, just the GW base brushes, GW shade brushes, the layer brushes, they're not bad. A couple of them are maybe a dollar more than
sure.
I might want to pay for the equivalent, but they're solid brushes. When I say that they're the best out there, no, but they're a solid brush.
Yeah.
If you are just getting started and you're just learning techniques and stuff, there's a lot of guys online who'll be like, oh, stay away from the synthetics, only go with the sable hair brushes. And I mean, Sam Lenz is a Golden Demon award-winning painter, and he uses 97-cent synthetic brushes, like a white handle, and he throws them away after he uses them. So, I mean, it's really, you learn the tool that you're using.
Yep.
And if you learn your tool well enough, you can do things with it that other people might not be able to.
Right. And just like paint, like different kinds of paint, whether it's contrast, washes, that different formulations of paint have different properties. And once you know what those properties are, you know how best, or you can figure out how best to apply that paint. Brushes are the same way. A sable hair brush with a large belly is going to be used for very different things than a flat base brush, than a synthetic small round that tends to be a lot stiffer. So it's better for things like edge highlighting, where you want to run the edge of the brush instead of the tip. Doesn't matter if you have a perfect point.
So I guess what I'm really just trying to hammer home is, if you're just getting started, find something that's comfortable in your hand.
Yes.
And learn how to use it.
Yep.
And then as you develop as a painter, you can make your decisions. I've gone through Winsor Newtons, and right now the one that I'm kind of breaking in is a Raphael. I've in my commission painting days, I was using the Broken Toad brushes, because the commission house that I was associated with at the time bought a whole bunch of those.
Sure.
They're all amazing. They all have their strengths and their weaknesses, but it's really, they're just a tool. And what's more important, much like with armies in the game, what's more important is the skill you bring to drive them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if you go to Meijer, Walmart, Kroger, whatever your local big box store is, and you go to the craft aisle and you buy a $3 bag of 15 brushes and you get started, awesome. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Find one you like, find one that fits in your hand, and start painting. And over time, as you learn and as you grow, you can evolve.
Yeah.
And you may be the next Sam Lenz out there painting with those Meijer 97-cent brushes because you just figured out how to do it really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Right. And I mean, I think the key thing you just want to watch out for is when you start fighting against the brush, it's probably time to get a better brush.
Yeah.
But if it's working for you, if you're happy with the results, it doesn't matter what other people think about it. It's like painting techniques, like dry brushing or showing primer on a finished model.
Yep.
Like, if you're happy with the results, who cares?
Yep.
The people who do, you don't need to worry about. I will say one quick plug. Monument Hobbies, which is part of the Creature Caster store now, used to be Slow Fuse Gaming. They have a brush line and they have a paint line that are both their own, their own design and everything. It's all uniquely formulated, and I cannot praise either of those highly enough. And they're both relatively affordable. The brushes are cheaper than Series 7. Probably right around where Games Workshop prices are, maybe a little bit higher. But you can get them in sets, which come at a decent discount. Yeah. And the paints themselves, it's like $4.80, I think, for a bottle, and you get at least as much as in a Vallejo or a Scale 75 or an Army Painter. It's the same amount, but
that's decent.
They're really good, high quality products. So I would definitely say, if you ever are looking for something new to try, that's kind of a smaller shop that's worth taking a look at.
Awesome. So this episode so far, we've talked about talk about our contrast paints for a bit in the first segment. And we came back, talked about tools. We talked about the kind of cutters that we would suggest.
Yes.
We didn't touch on mold line remover. The Citadel mold line remover for cleaning up models after you cut them off the sprue.
Yeah.
That's just a solid tool. It's just a piece of tool steel. Just use it to scrape off those mold lines without having to scuff everything up because you're using an X-Acto knife. So I'll fit that one in right there because there's not a whole lot to say about it. It's just awesome.
Yeah, sure, there are other companies out there that make them, and they're probably just as good, but
the Citadel one is solid.
It is, and it's a mold line remover in general is going to be better than an X-Acto knife.
Yeah, hands down.
I find that there are very few seams, mold lines, blemishes, whatever, that you can't get a nice finish on with a sharp X-Acto knife, a mold line remover, and some fine grit sandpaper.
Yep, and whether you want to use the sandpaper or sanding sticks or like the 3M sanding sponges that you can get at a hardware store, as long as you've got like fine sand on it and it's a forgiving surface, you obviously don't want one that's like a wooden block. You want to go with either the foam or just the sheet that you're working with your hand. But yeah, those are just basic tools, and they're cheap, readily available anywhere that has civilization.
Yeah.
And they're just definitely things to have. We talked about brushes briefly. See, that's kind of covers the basic tools of the hobby.
Yeah.
So we should let's take a quick break, come back and talk about our hobby progress.
Sure.
And then we'll close it out for this hobby edition of Choosers of This Lane.
Back for our last segment of episode 4. We've talked about contrast, we've talked about paints in general, we've talked about hobby tools and how at least one of us spends more money on them than they probably should. I'm not pointing any fingers other than at myself.
I didn't bring up all the stencils that you just ordered. So.
Oh yeah, now you did. Let's not talk about that either. Anyway, so all that being said, what do we use it to work on? We try to keep you guys updated on what our projects are and how we have a lot of inconsistencies on what we're working on. Okay, I have a lot of inconsistencies on what I'm working on. But anyway, Luke, why don't you fill us in on how the Imperial Army's coming?
Well, my monstrous pile of Imperial soup is coming along quite nicely.
Yes,
I've gotten the last bits back from the AdMech commission, so I finally have everything in house from that. It's looking good. Shout out to Mitch at Obsidian Studios for that. But I've added a couple things to it myself. Picked up a couple units of Cataphrone Breachers and Sicarian Infiltrators and Sicarian Rust Stalkers that will probably only ever get used in Kill Team.
That's fair.
But just those things that I've added myself that I'm kind of slowly picking away at, painting-wise. But as I said earlier in the episode, I stripped my Custodes down to make them kind of into a contrast experiment. And we have the new AdMech transport / tank kit coming out in a couple weeks here, so that's gonna chew up a little bit of my hobby time because I definitely want 2 of the transport. So that'll be something I'm working on. Plastic Sisters, of course, always looming in the horizon. I'm gonna totally fall off that cliff when it comes.
Yep.
But I am very, very tempted by. And this is something that Nate and I have talked about, maybe introducing a more narrative aspect into our kind of play group here.
Yeah.
Instead of just tournament practice, league practice, ITC missions here and there. Going with more just kind of fluffy fun games. And I'm thinking, since I'm working on, 2019 Year of the Imperium kind of thing in my personal hobby, I'm thinking I may do a small detachment of, as I said earlier, Emperor Spears or possibly Space Wolves. I mean, my store is called Valhalla Games and Sundries. I should probably have a Viking army.
I'm sorry, what was... Our podcast name didn't have anything to
do
with that,
right? Nothing at all. No, nothing. No.
Just making sure.
It's not at all the English translation of Norse term.
Right.
But so I've been thinking about doing Space Wolves, for that matter, plus Thunderwolf Cavalry are just begging for contrast paint.
They really are.
So I've got these little kind of side projects. And I'm like, man, is it a distraction or is it like my hobby flourishing? And that's kind of that age old, like when you switch gears and work on something else, is it a distraction that's slowing you down, or are you actually just getting enjoyment out of your hobby?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of at that point of like, I really kind of want to knock those last units out for my AdMech army. I really want to get my Custodes done, but ooh, Emperor Spears are pretty blue.
They are pretty blue.
and their chapter tactic is amazing, and the culture of their the people that they draw their stock from may or may not be a similar culture as to my own personal heritage. That may be influencing my decision slightly. So I've got those are kind of my projects on the horizon, is knock out those last couple units of AdMech, finish the we'll call it the Custodes Contrast army, and then eagerly await the arrival of Sisters of Battle. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. I get the feeling we'll be seeing those a little sooner than a lot of people are thinking. But
well, this Saturday, what is her name? Amelia Novena, the Sister Superior, goes on sale on Saturday. And I did see confirmation that it doesn't look like she's actually a statistically named character.
Oh, nice.
The data sheet in her instructions is actually the data sheet for the Sisters of Battle squad out of the new codex.
Ooh.
So GW is like, here's the data sheet for a squad of sisters, of which the leader is the Sister Superior.
That's pretty cool.
And so that's kind of how the model is, even though the model has a name.
Right.
It's really just an excuse to tease the sister squad. So what I'm wondering is it going to just say Acts of Faith, see page XX, or is it actually going to say on there? Because that's one of the rumors, is that they were not happy with how the Acts of Faith in the Beta Codex played out.
I think they said as much.
Yeah.
In a community post.
Yeah, that it's changing.
Yeah. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, but I get the feeling we'll find out.
As soon as Nate and I both open our Sisters Superiors that come on Saturday.
Well, that too. Good point. Yeah. I don't know. I'm, as always, hopping between armies. The Chaos army is in progress. I had a couple units commissioned up just to speed that up a little bit, and because I couldn't stand painting more cultists. But
there's like a law of diminishing returns on
really
a horde army stuff.
Yeah. Which, now that Contrast is out, probably wouldn't have been so bad. But when I started the commission, that wasn't even hinted at yet. So that being said, I've hopped around a little bit between my Eldar, kind of going back to those and just messing around with some color schemes. But when Contrast came out, as we kind of talked about, we both decided that we wanted to do a Contrast army, where that was kind of the main painting method we were using, primarily because we needed to see how it worked so we could talk about it, and so we could sell it better in this case. And that's something we both kind of decided to do. And I, being the, as some would call me, filthy Xenos lover that I am, decided that Necrons would be a great choice for Contrast, especially if I decided to go for something like a ceramic or a porcelain look. So that is my current my current project. I've got working on probably close to 2,000 points in Necrons, but it's going surprisingly fast. So that's kind of exciting to see.
That's true.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that pans out, but hopefully we'll get some pictures up. And
one model from the finish line, I'm going to remind him how much he likes Blood Angels, just to see if I can stop him from finishing the 2,000 point army.
Don't get me started. I've got a Leviathan Dreadnought that's supposed to be showing up in the next couple weeks, and it's a Blood Angels Leviathan Dreadnought, and it's going to wind up yellow, I'm sure, which I hate yellow, for the record, but for some reason I'm really excited about painting Lamenters. So whatever.
Because the irony runs strong in you.
Apparently so.
You're excited about the Melancholy Marines.
It's true. They're good guys. They're one of the few actual good guy chapters. They're like salamanders. They actually care about the people of the Imperium.
Yep.
Anyway.
It's part of the curse to 21st Founding.
Yes. Yes.
Their curse was they cared too much.
Yep. They're also constantly depressed. So there's that. But anyway, so that being said, all of that hopefully shows up in the near future on the channel as we start to work on battle reports and maybe more narrative pieces of things.
Yeah, that would be the goal that we want to work towards for sure. And we're just we're slow building that because we want to make sure that we're not putting any gray plastic on the table when we try to entertain y'all with our particular way of playing. Another thing too, kind of along the lines of that, is we are kind of trying to develop a way to support what we're doing here to entertain you guys, and Nate wanted to talk about that a little bit. So
we'd like to get more videos out. We'd like to be able to put out decent quality video as well as just the audio pieces, whether that's battle reports with nice terrain and all that, and we have access to a good chunk of it, but everything costs money. And we both work day jobs in addition to our hobbying and to the podcast. So we have limited amounts of time and other responsibilities, of course. So with that,
indeed,
we want to be able to provide all of you out there listening with the best content possible within whatever resources we can manage. So with that, we are working on putting together a Patreon account. So that way, if you want to contribute to those resources at all, we can, continue to improve the quality, improve the content, increase the output of content.
Well, we'd also like to get to the point where if, instead of us just waxing philosophic about the hobby and about painting, if that's something that our Patreon patrons would be interested in, we could potentially even look at doing like Google Hangouts for painting tutorials and things like that. Where
Discord server would probably be
that kind of stuff, where folks can actually, in a way, purchase like one-on-one paint lessons online or things like that. So just we're open to all kinds of potential growth for the channel and for the content that we create. But mostly, there's tons of podcasts and YouTube channels out there to make you a better competitive 40K player, or to just specifically work on painting. I mean, there's tons of content out there. What we would like to do is we would like to just build your fulfillment, your enjoyment in the hobby. And if that means playing more games, if that means painting more models, if that means talking about the lore, we kind of want to provide a one-stop shop for you where, do we want to teach you how to win a golden demon? That's not really what we're here for. What we want to do is we want the content that we provide to make you get more value out of your hobby in the time that you invest in it.
Yeah. I mean, I think a good way we could sum it up is by saying we sort of aim to provide a friendly local gaming store atmosphere on the internet. Fireside chats with two guys that you'd like to talk to at the hobby shop if you ran into us. Right. Hopefully you like to talk to us. But
I mean, they'll like to talk to me. I'm pretty rad.
Okay, that's fair. I can do that.
I am kidding. Actually, Nate's much more likable of the two.
Also debatable, but regardless, So that's kind of where we're going with that. And like we said, we're going to be pushing together a Patreon. Hopefully, get that out pretty soon here, and we'll have links out on Facebook, and we'll put it in our descriptions once it's done.
So I'm gonna drop the bomb and give us an accountability deadline.
Oh no!
And I'm gonna say I want the Patreon live and a first battle report recorded, if not posted, by the end of July.
Okay, that's fair.
So that's my goal. My goal is that we're at least editing a battle report within a month.
The goal is set.
All right. So you heard us.
Yep, that is the goal, and we should have at least one video out before then.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So hopefully more than one. But regardless, I think that's a great spot for us to leave off.
And we got a big release around the corner.
We do, yeah.
With the apocalypse.
We'll lots to talk about.
So we'll definitely have another video coming at you, or another podcast coming at you soon here.
Yep.
But with all that said, as Nate was trying to sneak us out the door. I think I'm gonna double down on that and say y'all have a good one. Thanks for joining us on Choosers of the Slain, and have a good night.